My name is Grace Whitaker, and I remember the night everything changed, the way the light caught the glass in my sister's hand, the way she raised it and said clear as daylight before turning to me with that smirk that always carried more venom than she realized, and she said, "Where is your husband and kids?" "Oh right, you do not have any," and they all laughed, not loud but sharp enough to cut through skin and bone. My parents smiled like it was harmless fun, but my fork froze midair because I could feel something inside me breaking. I had spent years paying their bills, saving their home, holding together everything they let fall apart, and still I was the punchline at their table. So I set my spoon down, looked straight at my sister and said, "Where is your money?" "Oh right, I have been supporting you until today," and the silence that followed was the kind that makes the air heavy, like the room itself is holding its breath. It was not peace, it was the start of something else, something that would burn away everything that came before that. Silence followed me home, down the highway, through the rain, into my apartment where the walls felt too close. I sat at my desk and looked at the stack of bills that had shaped my life. I opened my laptop, saw the transfers, the proof of every time I chose them over myself, more than $80,000 in 7 years, and when the screen asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer?" I clicked yes, and it felt like cutting a chain I did not even know I still wore. The next morning the calls began, my mother soft, my father stern, my sister pretending to be helpless again, every word soaked in guilt. "You cannot do this to your family, you owe us." But I said nothing. I let the silence answer for me until one message came, "Come home Sunday, we need to talk." And I knew they were not calling for peace, they were calling for control. I drove to Tacoma that gray morning with no fear, no guilt, just the quiet certainty of someone who had finally stopped apologizing. I walked into the house and it smelled the same, coffee and old wood and disappointment. My mother avoided my eyes, my father looked ready for war, my sister leaned against the counter scrolling her phone like she did not care. "Grace," my mother said, "we cannot live like this, the mortgage, the bills, you know how hard it is for us." And I said, "I know, I have known for 7 years." My father snapped, "Then why stop now?" And I told him, "Because it is not help if it is expected, that is called obligation." My sister laughed, "Wow, someone found their backbone, congratulations sis." And I told her, "You have spent years living off me like I am your second parent." And she glared at me and said, "You think you are better than us?" And I said, "No, I am just done paying for you to pretend." And my father slammed the table and demanded respect. And I said, "Respect is earned, not demanded." And he went silent because he knew I was right. And that was when I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder and dropped it on the table. Records, every transfer, every payment, every lie they had built their comfort on. And when I laid down the paper with my father's forged signature, he turned pale. I said, "This is the home equity loan you took out using my name." He said, "That is ridiculous." And I said, "The bank disagrees." And I told them I had a lawyer named Rachel Tran handling the case and that they had 30 days to remove my name from everything or she would file. And my mother cried and said, "Sweetheart, we only did it to protect the house." And I said, "You did it because you knew I would clean it up." And my father said, "You cannot threaten us." And I said, "It is not a threat, it is a deadline." And my sister whispered, "You would not." And I said, "Try me." And in that moment I stopped being their safety net and became my own person. I left the house, walked out into the cold air, and for the first time in my life I felt light, I felt free. 2 weeks later Rachel called, "The investigation is complete, the bank confirmed the forgery, your name is cleared." And I stood by the window in my apartment watching the city lights blur on the glass, and I breathed for what felt like the first time in years. It was over, the guilt, the debt, the invisible leash. And when I poured myself a glass of wine that night, I raised it to no one and said to endings, to beginnings, to silence that means peace. Months passed, and then one day I saw the listing online, the Tacoma house for sale, the same house I had saved from.